Ian, thank you so much for joining us here at CAIS20.
Good to be back, yeah.
It's a year since we last met at this conference, and we've moved into a new decade. So what are the key challenges that these guys are going to be facing in the 2020s?
Well, I mean, obviously they're worried about a softening global economy. The U.S. has held up longer than anyone would have expected when Trump came to office in 2016, but no one really believes that lasts beyond the elections. Meanwhile, the IMF has been downgrading particularly major emerging markets around the world. Governance started to slip in a lot of places, like India in particular, for example. And you've got coronavirus, that the data is kind of bleak so far. It is not really trusted in addition to that, and China's a hell of a lot bigger than it was when the SARS virus came. By far the biggest thing people should be worrying about in the immediate term in terms of impact on the global economy, and no trust between the Chinese government and the U.S. to help back that up or facilitate a cooperative outcome.
That decoupling of the Chinese-US relationship is quite significant, isn't it? That's something you think is going to be a huge factor this year.
It really is. I mean, before the Phase 1 trade deal was cut, there were people that believed, my God, we might be in an escalatory tit for tat on tariffs. Now, Trump backed away from that, as he's backed away from USMCA, which has gotten done, even US-Europe. So the people that were concerned about the trade environment actually feel a little bit better right now, but everything else between the US and China, whether it's on this pandemic, or it's Hong Kong, or it's Taiwan, or it's the South China Sea, or it's intellectual property, or it's 5G and their technology complex, those are places where both sides are actually at loggerheads with each other. It's not causing big conflict with other countries around the world because the Chinese really don't want that fight. But between China and the United States, it's a real danger. And again, now that we have a proximate crisis emanating from China, the danger that causes populism, nationalism on both sides to really rile those two countries and put them in a more confrontational stance, very high. Chances of a Phase 2 China-US deal in that context, pretty much zero.
In terms of global, one of the key themes at this conference, you've talked about a geopolitical recession with everybody sort of looking after their own entities. That's a different environment too.
It is, and it's cyclical, but unlike economic recessions, geopolitical recessions take a lot longer to develop and to unwind. And the reason why they occur is because you have institutions that you create. When you do, they reflect the way the world was at that time, whether it's the United Nations or it's NAFTA or it's NATO. But when geopolitics shift dramatically, those institutions usually stay exactly the way they were. And at some point, whether it's China getting much bigger but not aligning with our values, Russia in decline but trying to undermine us, America's allies more divided, not really as strong as they used to be, and America quite strong but unwilling to play the role of leadership, suddenly you realize that that institutional framework is broken. And it's not broken through anyone's fault. It's just broken because the institutions have stayed in place and the geopolitics are suddenly completely different. And that means that we're not able to respond with the same level of coordination or resilience to some of the big challenges in the world today, like something we've been talking about all day today, climate.
Really, you need those institutional structures to bring that about, and the ones we have currently just aren't up to the job.
Well, and you need new ones. I mean, when we put together the United Nations framework, climate change was not something people were paying any attention to. When you put together NATO, you weren't thinking about little green men going into Ukraine or propaganda war or cyber attacks. You were talking about the nuclear balance and arms control. So it shouldn't surprise us that these new challenges don't have our institutional framework to respond to them. But if the Americans and the Chinese, the big powers, don't trust each other and can't build new institutions, we're not at a post-World War II movement, and the populations in the countries themselves don't want to spend time or capital on anything outside their country, then obviously it's going to be a lot more challenging. And that's why people here at CAIS this year, that's why a lot of the CEOs in the investment community, they're saying, what are we going to do to take the lead when we recognize that in 10, 15, 20 years, the climate environment is going to be dramatically more costly, it's going to drive capital, it's going to drive decisions in the investment community, but the public leaders, the government leaders aren't going to be out in front. That's a challenging one.
The corporations have the power to do that job rather than previously what would have been done by governments.
I wouldn't say they have the power to do the job, but they have the inclination and the intent much more. They have the capabilities. So, it's not like all the CEOs together are going to fix climate. You still need the government actors. But if we know that we're heading to a 3 degree, a 3.5 degree, a 4 degrees Celsius climate warming environment, and the trillions of dollars that'll cost the hundreds of millions of people that will be displaced as a consequence of that, if you're a long-term investor, you want to get ahead of that. You know it's coming. You understand the regulations are going to change, the subsidy models are going to change, the security needs are going to change, but you got to build the infrastructure that responds to that. You know, smart money is going to get ahead of that. You
really believe that those bottom line effects are going to be more important and have the sort of impact rather than it being purpose in these people? They've got to see the actual bottom line effect.
Oh, sure. I mean, I don't think that Larry Fink is being driven by a change in purpose. I think he's being driven by recognizing that a lot of his own portfolios are invested in by, you know, school pension funds and others that are 10, 15, 20-year horizon, and he's going to get destroyed if he doesn't get out there. If he wants to be number one, he should get there first. I mean, you could make the argument that Microsoft is taking a bigger move because of Bill Gates and the history and the connection there. Some of that's purpose-driven, I buy it, but generally speaking, if it's not really aligned with your business plan, you're not likely to do more than check the box. And climate change is not something that's going to respond to checking the box. So, I mean, look, we have to understand that 20 years ago, we had the same level of fossil fuels in the global energy mix than we have today. So that's not purpose change driven, that is a whole bunch of people getting wealthier and wanting access to energy. So that's why we're going to be at, I mean, at this point, my best guess is 3.5 degrees Celsius before we start really leveling off. That's enormous consequence. That means that, you know, so many species around the world, more than half are gone. That means that, you know, lots of land that we're, including what we're sitting on right now, this won't exist. And okay, that's a problem for our kids and grandkids, not for us. But, you know, we need to do better for these people, obviously. Where
can you find optimism? It sounds like a very pessimistic picture you're painting. Is there optimism?
The geopolitics right now are pessimistic. I mean, if I was an economist and you called me up in 2008 in the middle of the Great Recession, you said, Ian, where's the optimism? I'm like, look, you're catching me at a time where the stuff I focus on happens to be in a recession, happens to be really functioning badly. That's not the fault of the people, that just happens to be the time we're in. The challenges are pretty great. The optimism comes from, you've got billions more people that are getting educated that'll be part of the solution set. Sub-Saharan Africa, young people in urban centers, going to college, getting online, having access to data. That data transforming nations in terms of efficiency of agriculture and education and healthcare. Those things are really important. So, you know, both the human capacity as well as how much wealth exists in the planet. I mean, the problems that we face now are incredibly daunting. But, you know, not only is China bigger so it causes more problems, China has more wealth. China has more people in the middle class, so their ability to respond and not fall apart is also more significant. So both of those things are important, but as someone who focuses on the geopolitics and in the geopolitical environment that's been actually quite stable and indeed triumphalist, especially since the Soviet Union collapsed in '91, the wall came down in '88, this is a very different environment.
With that in mind as well, does that desire for stability in such an unstable environment sort of cause a stifling to technology and advancements in other areas?
It reduces advances in technology. I mean, if you have the United States versus China and they're building technological competitors, that means you're not going to have the best groups of scientists in the world and the best data sets in the world working together. Obviously, that's far from optimal in terms of developing new technological innovations. And in fact, Bill Gates, I was with him in Beijing, he was so angry that some of the new energy technologies he's working on that have Chinese and American scientists together are now being made impossible by regulatory restrictions coming out of the United States on advanced technology. He's deeply frustrated. This is going to set us back by 5 years. We don't want to be set back on 5 years by anything when you're looking at the climate conditions and the inequality conditions that we have in the world today.
And is that going to change anytime soon, that sort of lack of stability and what
the lack of stability is not a short-term thing. It is, these institutions are slow-moving and the geopolitics have been building to where we are today for many decades.
Ian, thank you so much, as always, for sharing your fascinating insights. Great to talk to you.